In the quiet of the evening, where shadows softly play, a fairy tale wolf sheds his skin, gently drifting away, with a twinkle in his eye and a heart full of dreams. He waits for the Friday night glow, where the magic redeems. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one and for all. In a world of stars dancing, his spirit takes flight, with stories of beauty under the starlit night. He picks up a book, the pages worn and wise, every line a whisper under the vast skies, from far off lands where the wild things roam, to enchanted forests where the heart finds home. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one and for all. In a world of stars dancing, his spirit takes flight, with stories of beauty under the starlit night. With every word he reads, he casts a spell of peace, transporting all who listen to a land where joy won't cease. For in these fairy tales, amidst the laughter and tears, the wolf finds his solace, he conquers his fears. As the night grows deeper, he serenades the moon with melodies that linger, a soft and soothing tune. In this sacred hour, where magic abounds, the fairy tale wolf writes love into sound. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one and for all. In a world of stars dancing, his spirit takes flight, with stories of beauty under the starlit night. So if you hear a whisper beneath the silver skies, know it's the fairy tale wolf letting his heart rise.
I hate that that song cuts off early. But there wasn't anything they said they could do to fix it, so... I don't have the light on the cat bed. I guess I'll turn the cat cam back off then. Because, you know, having a black cat on a black bed does not really make it easy to be seen. And there's Togepi in chat, if anyone is so inclined to attempt to fix it. John Nash was the architect responsible for expanding Buckingham House into Buckingham Palace we know today, starting in 1825. So he started this roughly the same time as the Mummy book was written. That's kind of cool. Okay, why does that one still not have the gummy show up? Or is it not one of my level 1 gummies? Timers. Where is it? Okay, that's the lurk one, right? Kendra 3 lurk. Oh, where are my emotes? Peer reward. Computer self-lagging. Yeah, I got the Togepi. Come on, computer. You think we're on holiday? Come on, show me the emotes. Okay, drink's not one of the free ones. I get to switch out. Eat. Let's switch it out with drink. Okay, make that a follower one. Then I can make 8 the tier 1. Ta-da! Now the emote will show up when I do the messages. My music doesn't loop right either. Oh well. How is everyone doing? Is everyone good? Are you ready for a lot of fairy tales? Because I've got 7 to get through tonight. I'm going to try to get through all of them so we can finish the orange book and pretty much get that wrapped up, and then we can start 2 new books next year. Sound like a good idea? I would think so. But anyway, let's go ahead and get over to the fairy tale book reading area. I got it listed as a library. I don't know why I mess up saying it. Hey, Guilty. How you doing? Strange to think that this is the first day of year 4 of me being an affiliate. Which means I've been a professional fairy tale narrator for 3 years. Well, professional. Meaning I just got paid, but we'll get paid for the ads more than anything else. But yeah. It's Friday, so it's fairy tales. And I've got 7 stories left in the Orange Fairy Book. There are only 2 more fairy books left in the series after this one. And we'll be starting the next fairy book, well, next year. And I've got another, it's not really a folklore book, but a research document, so to speak, on the fairies of Scotland and Ireland. So, I'll be doing that on Thursdays for a while. Now that I've got the mummy completed. I can't believe I had to sing yesterday as a mummy. How strange that was. I mean, I had to sing using this voice, and it was challenging at best. But it is, well, it's 9:08. It's kind of strange. I have a set schedule. I start the stream purposefully 5 minutes early so I can get the ads out of the way, so I can start officially at 9. Then I usually start reading at 9:10. That way, people have a chance to get here. Oh, this is another, I will say Mexican storybook on this one. Which would be really interesting to read this in Spanish because my pronunciation would not be great. But it would be authentic. So anyway, our first story for this fabulous Friday night of fairy tales. The Bird of Truth. Once upon a time, there lived a poor fisher who built a hut on the banks of a stream which, shunning the glare of the sun, the noise of the towns, flowing quietly past the trees and under bushes, listening to the songs of birds overhead. One day the fisherman had gone out as usual to cast his nets, and he saw borne towards him on the current a cradle of crystal. Slipping his net quickly beneath it, he drew it out and lifted the silk coverlet. Inside, laying on a soft bed of cotton, were two babies, a boy and a girl, who opened their eyes and smiled at him. The man was filled with pity at the sight, and throwing down his lens, he took the cradle and the babies home to his wife. The good woman flung up her hands in despair when she beheld the contents of the cradle. "Ah, ain't not enough," she cried. "Bringing us 2 more. How do you think we can feed them?" "You would not have had me leave them to die of hunger," answered he, "or be swallowed up by the waves of the sea. What is enough for 8 is also enough for 10. The wife said no more, and in truth her heart yearned over the little creatures. Somehow or other, food was never lacking in the hut, and the children grew up and were so good and gentle that, in time, their foster parents loved them as well, or better, than their own, who were quarrelsome and envious. It did not take the orphans long to notice that the boys did not like them, and were always playing tricks on them, so they used to go away by themselves and spend whole hours by the banks of the river. Here they would take out bits of bread they had saved from their breakfast and crumble some for the birds. In return, the birds taught them many things: how to get up early in the morning, how to sing, how to talk their language, which very few people know. But though the little orphans did their best to avoid quarreling with their foster brothers, it was always difficult to keep the peace. Matters got worse and worse till one morning the eldest boy said to the twins, "Well, it is all very fine for you to pretend that you have such good manners, and are so much better than we, but we have at least a father and a mother, while you have only got the river, like the toads and the frogs." The poor children did not answer the insult, but it made them very unhappy. And they told each other in whispers that they could not stay there any longer, and must go into the world and seek their fortunes. So, the next day they arose as early as the birds, and stole downstairs without anybody hearing them. One window was open, and they crept softly out and ran to the side of the river. Then, feeling as if they had found a friend, They walked along its banks, hoping by and by they would meet someone to take care of them. The whole of the day they went on steadily without seeing a living creature till, in the evening, weary and footsore, they saw before them a small hut. This raised their spirits for a moment, but the door was shut and the hut seemed empty, and so great was their disappointment that they almost cried. However, the boy fought down his tears and said cheerfully, "Well, at any rate, here is a bench we can sit down on, and when we are rested, we will think what is best to do next." Then they sat down, and for some time they were too tired even to notice anything. But by and by they saw that under the tiles of the roof a number of swallows were sitting, chatting merrily to each other. Of course, the swallows had no idea that the children understood their language, or they would have not talked so freely. But as it was, they said whatever came into their heads.
"Good evening, my fine madam,"
remarked the swallow, whose manners were rather rough and countrified, to another who looked particularly distinguished.
"Happy indeed are the eyes that behold you. Only think of having returned from your long-forgotten country friends after you have lived for years in a palace." "I have inherited this nest from my parents,"
replied the other,
"and as they left it to me, I certainly shall make it my home. But,"
she added politely,
"I hope that you and your family are well." "Very well indeed, I'm glad to say. But my poor daughter had, a short time ago, such a bad inflammation in her eyes that she could have gone blind if I had not been able to find the magic herb which cured her at once." "And how is the nightingale singing? Does the lark soar as high as ever? And does the linnet dress herself as smartly?"
But here the country swallow drew herself up.
"I never talk gossip," she said severely. "Our people, who were once so innocent and well-behaved, have been corrupted by the bad examples of men. It is 1,000 pities." "What? Innocence and good behavior are not to be met among the birds, nor in the country? My dear friend, what are you saying?" "The truth and nothing more. Imagine, when we returned here, we met some linnets who, just as the spring and the flowers and the long days had come, were setting out for the north in the cold. Out of pure compassion, we tried to persuade them to stay and give up this folly, but they only replied with the utmost insolence." "How shocking!" exclaimed the city swallow. "Yes, it is. And worse than that, the crested lark that was formerly so timid and shy is now no better than a thief, and steals maize and corn whenever she can get it." "I am astonished at what you say." "You will be more astonished when I tell you that on my arrival here for the summer, I have found my nest occupied by a shameless sparrow." "This is my nest," I said. "Yours," he answered with a bruised laugh. "Yes, mine. My ancestors were born here, and my sons will be born here also." And at that my husband set upon him and threw him out of the nest. I'm sure nothing of the sort has ever happened in town. "Not exactly, perhaps, but I have seen a great deal. If only you knew." "Oh, do tell us, do tell us!" cried they all.
And when they had settled themselves comfortably, the city swallow began.
"You must know that when our king fell in love with a younger daughter of a tailor, who was as good and gentle as she was beautiful, his nobles hoped that he would have chosen a queen from one of their daughters and tried to prevent the marriage. But the queen would not listen. But the king would not listen to them, and it took place. Not many months later, war broke out, and the king rode away at the head of the army, while the queen remained behind, very unhappy at the separations. When peace was made, and when the king returned, he was told his wife had 2 babies in his absence, that both were dead, that she herself had gone out of her mind and was obliged to shut up in a tower in the mountains, where, in time, the fresh air might cure her." "Of course not," answered the city lady, with some contempt for this. Dang it, I missed one. And is it not true?
Asked the swallows eagerly.
Of course not,
Answered the city lady, with some contempt for their stupidity.
The children were alive at the very moment in the gardener's cottage, but at night the chamberlain came down and put them in a cradle of crystal, which he carried to the river. For a whole day they floated safely, though the stream was deep and it was very still, and the children took no harm. In the morning, so I am told, to my friend the kingfisher, they were rescued by fishermen who lived near the riverbank.
The children had been lying on the bench, listening lazily to the chatter up to this point, but when they heard the story of the crystal cradle, which their foster mother had always been fond of telling them, they sat upright and looked at each other.
How glad I am I learned the bird's language,
said the eyes of one to the other. Meanwhile, the sparrow had spoken again.
That is indeed good fortune,
cried they.
And when the children are grown up, they can return to their father and set their mother free. It will not be so easy as you think,
answered the city swallow, shaking her head.
For they will have to prove that they are the king's children, and also that their mother never went mad at all. In fact, it is so difficult that there's only one way of proving it to the king. And what is that?
Cried all the other sparrows at once.
And how do you know it? I know,
answered the city swallow,
because one day when I was passing through the palace gates, I met a cuckoo who, as I need not tell you, always pretends to be able to tell you into the future. We began to talk about certain things which were happening in the palace, and of the events of the past years. Ah, said he, the only person who can expose the wickedness of the ministers and show the king how wrong he has been is the bird of truth who can speak the language of men. Where is the bird of truth found? I asked. It is shut up in a castle guarded by a thin giant who only sleeps 1/4 of an hour out of a whole 24, replied the cuckoo. And where is his castle?
Inquired the country swallow, who, like all the rest, and the children most of all, had been listening with deep attention.
That is just what I want to know,
answered her friend.
I can tell you that not far from here is a tower where dwells an old witch, and it is she who knows the way, and she will only tell it to the person who promises to bring her the water from the fountain of many colors, which she uses for her enchantments. But never will she betray the place where the bird of truth is hidden, for she hates him, and would kill him if she could, knowing well, however, that the bird cannot die, as he is immortal. She keeps him closely shut up and guarded night and day by the birds of bad faith, who seek to gag him so that his voice should not be heard. And there's no one else who can tell the poor boy where to find the bird, or if he should ever manage to reach the tower?
Asked the country swallow.
No one,
replied the city swallow,
except an owl who lives in a hermit's life in the desert, and he knows only one word of man's speech, and that is cross. So that even if the prince did succeed in getting there, he could never understand what the owl said. But look, the sun is sinking to his nest in the depths of the sea. I must go to mine. Good night, friends. Good night.
Then the swallow flew away, and the children, who had forgotten both hunger and weariness in the joy of the strange news, rose up and followed in the direction of her flight. After 2 hours walking, they arrived at a large city, which they felt sure must be the capital of their father's kingdom. Seeking a good-natured-looking woman standing in the door of a house, they asked her if she would give them a night's lodging, and she was so pleased with their pretty faces and nice manners that she welcomed them warmly. It was scarcely light the next morning before the girl was sweeping out the rooms and the boy was watering the garden, so by the time the good woman came downstairs, there was nothing left for her to do. This so delighted her that she begged the children to stay with her altogether, and the boy answered that he would leave his sisters here gladly, but that he would put himself some serious business on hand and must not linger in pursuit of it. So he bade them farewell and set out. For 3 days he wandered by the most out-of-the-way paths, but no signs of a tower were to be seen anywhere. On the fourth morning it was just the same, and filled with despair he flung himself down on the ground under a tree and hid his face in his hands. In a little while he heard a rustling over his head, and looking up he saw a turtle dove watching him with her bright eyes.
"Oh, dove!"
cried the boy, addressing the bird in her own language.
"Oh, dove, tell me, I pray you, where is the castle of the Come and Never Go?" "Child,"
answered the dove,
"who has sent you on such a useless quest?"
"My good and evil fortune," replied the boy. "I know not which."
"To get there," the dove said, "you must follow the wind towards which way the wind. You must follow the wind to wind which today is blowing towards the castle."
The boy thanked her and followed the wind, fearing all the time that it might change direction and lead him astray. But the wind seemed to feel pity for him, and it blew steadily. With each step the country became more and more dreary, but at nightfall the child could see behind the dark and bare rocks something darker still. It was a tower in which dwelt the witch. And seizing the knocker, he gave 3 loud knocks, which were echoed in the hollows of the rocks around. The door opened slowly, and there appeared on the threshold an old woman holding up a candle to her face, which was so hideous that the boy involuntarily stepped backwards, almost as frightened as by the troop of lizards, and beetles and such creatures that surrounded her, as by the woman herself.
"Who are you who dare to knock at my door and wake me?"
cried she.
"Be quick and tell me what you want, or it will be the worse for you."
"Madam," answered the boy,
"I believe that you alone know the way to the castle of Come and Never Go, and I pray you to show it to me."
"Very good," replied the witch with something that she meant for a smile. "But today is it late. Tomorrow you shall go. Now enter, and you shall sleep with my lizards."
"I cannot stay," said he. "I must go back at once so as to reach the road from which I started before day dawns."
"If I tell you, you will promise me that you will bring me this jar full of the many-colored water from the spring in the courtyard of the castle?" asked she. "If you fail to keep your word, I will change you into a lizard forever."
"I promise,"
answered the boy. Then the woman called on a very thin dog and said to him, "Conduct this pig of a child to the castle of Come and Never Go, and take care that you should warn my friend of his arrival." And the dog arose and shook itself, and set out. At the end of 2 hours, it stopped in front of a large castle, big and black and gloomy, whose doors stood wide open, although neither sound nor light gave any sign of a presence within. The dog, however, seemed to know what to expect, and after a wild howl went on, but the boy, who was uncertain whether this was a quarter of an hour when the giant was asleep, hesitated to follow him, and paused for a moment under a wild olive that grew nearby, the only tree which he had beheld since he had parted from the dove.
"Oh, heaven help me!"
cried he.
"Cross, cross,"
answered a voice. The boy leapt for joy as he recognized the note of the owl which the swallow had spoken of, and he said softly, in the bird's language,
"Oh, wise owl, I pray you to protect and guide me, for I have come in search of the bird of truth. And first I must fill this jar with the many-colored water from the courtyard of the castle."
"Do not do that," answered the owl, "but fill the jar from the spring which bubbles close to the fountain with the many-colored water. Afterwards, go into the aviary opposite the great door, but be careful not to touch any of the brightly plumaged birds contained in it, which will cry to you, each one, that he is a bird of truth. choose only a small white bird that is hidden in the corner, which the others will try incessantly to kill, not knowing that it cannot die. And be quick, for at this very moment the giant has fallen asleep, and you have only a quarter of an hour to do everything." The boy ran as fast as he could and entered the courtyard, where he saw the two spring close together. He passed by the many-colored one without casting a glance, and filled the jar from the fountain, whose water was clean and pure. Next he hastened to the aviary, and almost deafened by the clamor that rose as he shut the door behind him. The voices of peacocks, voices of ravens, voices of magpies, each claiming to be the bird of truth. With steadfast face the boy walked by all of them to the corner, where hemmed in by a hand of fierce crows was a small white bird he sought. Putting her safely to his breast, he passed out, followed by the screams of birds of bad faith which he left behind. Once outside, he ran without stopping to the witch's tower and handed the old woman the jar she had given him. "Become a parrot!" cried she, flinging the water over him. But instead of losing his shape, as so many had done before, he only grew 10 times handsomer, for the water was enchanted for good and not ill. Then the creeping multitude around the witch hastened to roll themselves in the water, and stood up, human beings again. When the witch saw what was happening, she took her broomstick and flew out of there. Who can guess the delight of the sister at the sight of her brother bearing the bird of truth? But although the boy had accomplished much, something very difficult yet remained, and that was how to carry the bird of truth to the king without her being seized by the wicked courtiers, who would be ruined by the discovery of the plot. Soon, no one knew how, the news spread abroad that the bird of truth was hovering around the palace, and the courtiers made all sorts of preparations to hinder her reaching the king. They got weapons ready that were sharpened, and weapons that were poisoned. They sent for eagles and falcons to hunt her down, and constructed cages and boxes in which to shut her up if they were not able to kill her. They declared that her white plumage was really put to hide on her black feathers. In fact, there was nothing they did not do in order to prevent the king from seeing the bird, or from paying attention to her words if he did. As often happens in these cases, the courtiers brought about that which they feared. They talked so much about the bird of truth that at last the king heard of it, and expressed a wish to see her. The more difficulties that were put in his way, the stronger grew his desire, and in the end the king published a proclamation that whoever found the bird of truth should bring her to him without delay. As soon as he saw this proclamation, the boy called his sister, and they hastened to the palace. The bird was buttoned inside his tunic, but, as might be expected, the courtiers barred the way, and told the child that he could not enter. It was in vain that the boy declared he was only obeying the king's commands. The courtiers only replied that his Majesty was not yet out of bed, and it was forbidden to wake him. They were still talking when suddenly the bird settled a question by flying upwards to an open window into the king's own room, alighting on the pillow, close to the king's head. She bowed respectfully and said,
"My lord, I am the bird of truth whom you wish to see. I have been obliged to approach you in the manner because the boy who brought me here is kept out of the palace by your courtiers."
"They shall pay for their insolence," said the king, and he instantly ordered one of his attendants to conduct the boy at once to his chambers. And in a moment more the prince entered, holding his sister by the hand. "Who are you?" asked the king, "and what has the bird of truth to do with you?"
"If it please your majesty, the bird of truth will explain that for herself,"
answered the boy. And the bird did explain. The king heard for the first time the wicked plot that had been successful for so many years. He took his children in his arms, with tears in his eyes, and hurried off with them to the tower in the mountains where the queen was shut up. The poor woman was as white as marble, for she had been living almost in darkness, but when she saw her husband and children, The color came back to her face, and she was as beautiful as ever. They all returned to the state to the city, where great rejoicings were held. The wicked courtiers had their heads cut off, and all their property was taken away. As for the good couple, they were given riches and honor, and were loved and cherished to the end of their lives. Okay. Getting over to our second story that says it's from the Journal of Anthropological Institute. North American story. The Mink and the Wolf. In a big forest in the north of America lived a quantity of wild animals of all sorts. They were always very polite when they met, but in spite of that, they kept a close watch upon each other, as each was afraid of being eaten or killed by somebody else. But their manners were so good that no one would have ever guessed that. One day, a smart young wolf went out to hunt, promising his grandfather and grandmother that he would be back before bedtime. He trotted along quite happily through the forest till he came to his favorite place, just where the river turns into the sea. There, just as he had hoped, he saw the chief mink fishing in a canoe. "I want to fish too," cried the wolf, but the mink said nothing and pretended not to hear. "I wish you would take me onto your boat," shouted the wolf, louder than before, and he continued to beseech the mink so long that at last he grew tired of it, and he paddled to the shore close enough for the wolf to jump in. "Sit down quietly at the end, and we shall be upset," said the mink. "And if you care about sea urchins' eggs, you will find plenty in the basket. But be sure not to eat the white ones. The red ones will kill you." So the wolf, who was always hungry, began to eat the eggs greedily, and when he had finished, he told the mink he thought he would have a nap. "Well, if you stretch yourself out and rest your head on that piece of wood," said the mink. And the wolf did as he was bid, and was soon fast asleep. The mink crept over him and stabbed him to the heart with his knife, and he died without moving. After that he landed on the beach, skinned the wolf, and taking the skin to the cottage, he hung it up with the fire to dry. Not many days later, the wolf's grandmother, who, with the help of all her relations, had been searching for him everywhere, entered the cottage to buy some sea urchins' eggs, saw the skin, which she guessed that to be that of her grandson. "I knew he was dead! I knew it! I knew it!" she cried, weeping bitterly, till the mink told her rudely that if she wanted to make so much noise she had better do it outside, as he liked to be quiet. So, half blinded by her tears, the old woman went home the way she had come, and running in at the door she flung herself down in front of the fire. "What are you crying for?" asked the old wolf and some friends who had been spending the afternoon with him. "I shall never see my grandson any more," answered she. "Mink has killed him. Oh, oh!" And putting her head down, she began to weep as loudly as ever. "There, there," said her husband, lying upon her shoulder. "Be comforted. If he is dead, we will avenge him." And calling to the others, they proceeded to talk over the best plan. It took them a long time to make up their minds. One wolf proposed one thing and one another, but at last it was all agreed that the old wolf should give a great feast in his house, and that the mink should be invited to the party. And in order that no one should be lost, it was further agreed that each wolf should bear the invitations to the guests that lived nearest to him. Now the wolves thought they were very cunning, but the mink was more cunning still, and though he sent a message by a white hare that he was going that way, saying that he would be delighted to be a present, he determined that he would make his precautions. So he went to a mouse who had often done him a good turn, and greeted her with his best bow.
I have a favor to ask of you, friend Mouse, said he, and if you will grant it, I will carry you on my back every night for a week to the patch of maize right up the hill. The favor is mine, answered the mouse. Tell me what it is I can have the honor of doing for you. Oh, something quite easy, replied the mink. I only want you, between today and the next full moon, to gnaw through the boughs and paddles of the wolf people so that directly they will use them, they will break. But, of course, you must manage it that they notice nothing. Of course, answered the mouse. Nothing is easier, but as the full moon is tomorrow night, there's not much time. I'd better begin at once. And then the mink thanked her and went his way, but before he had gone far, he came back again. Perhaps, while you're about the wolf's house seeing after their bows, it would do no harm if you were to make that knothole in the wall a little bigger, he said. Not large enough to draw attention, of course, but it might come in handy. And with another nod, he left her. The next evening the mink washed and brushed himself carefully and set out for the feast. He smiled to himself as he looked at the dusty track and perceived that though the marks of the wolves' feet were not many, not a single guest was to be seen anywhere. He knew very well what that meant, and he had taken his precautions, and was not afraid. The house door stood open, and through a crack the mink could see the wolves crowding around the corner behind it. However, he entered boldly, and as soon as he was fairly inside, the door shut with a bang, and the whole herd sprang at him with their red tongues hanging out of their mouths. Quick as they were too late, for the mink was already through the knothole and racing to his canoe. The knothole was too small for the wolves, and there were so many of them at the hut that it was some time before they could get the door open. Well, then they seized the bows and arrows which were hanging on the walls, and once outside, they aimed at the mink. As they pulled their bows back, it broke in their paws, and so they threw them away and bounded to the shore with all their speed to the place where their canoes were drawn up on the beach. Now, although the mink could not run as fast as wolves, he had a good start, and was already afloat when the swiftest among them threw themselves into the nearest canoe. They pushed off, but as they dipped the paddles into the water, they snapped just as the bows had done, and were quite useless. I know where there's some new ones, cried a young fellow, leaping on shore and rushing to a little cave at the back of the beach. And the mink's heart smote him when he heard, for he had not known of the secret store. After a long chase, the wolves managed to surround their prey, and the mink, seeing it was no good resisting any more, gave himself up. Some of the elder wolves brought out some cedar bands, which they always carried round their bodies, but the mink laughed scornfully at the sight of them. Why, I could snap those in a moment, he said. If you want to make sure that I cannot escape, better take a line of kelp and bind me with that. You are right, answered the grandfather. Your wisdom is greater than ours. And he bade his servants gather enough kelp from the rocks to make a line, as they had none brought with them. While the line is being made, you might as well let me have one last dance, remarked the mink. And the wolves replied, Very good, you may have your dance. Perhaps it may amuse us as well as you. So they brought 2 canoes and placed them one beside the other. And the mink stood up on his hind legs and began to dance, first in one canoe and then in the other. And so graceful was he that the wolves forgot they were going to put him to death, and howled with pleasure. Pull the canoes a little apart. They're too close for this new dance, he said, pausing for a moment. And the wolves separated them a little to give springs between them, sometimes pirouetting while he stood on one foot on the prow of both. Now nearer, now further, he would cry as the dance went on. No, further still. And springing into the air, amidst the howls of applause, he came down head foremost and dived to the bottom. And through the wolves, whose howls had now changed to those of rage, sought him everywhere, they never found him, for he hid behind a rock till they were out of sight, and then made his way home in another forest.
stinking minks. Anyway, our next story for the night: Adventures of an Indian Brave. A long, long way off, right away in the west of America, there once lived an old man who had one son. The country round was covered with forests, and in which dwelt all kinds of wild beasts. The young man and his companions used to spend whole days in hunting them, and he was the finest hunter of all the tribe. One morning, when winter was coming on, the youth and his companions set off as usual to bring back some mountain goats and deer to be salted down, as he was afraid of a snowstorm, and if the wind blew and the snow drifted, the forest might be impassable for some weeks. The old man and the wife, however, would not go out, but remained in the wigwam making bows and arrows. It soon grew so cold in the forest that at last one of the men declared that they could walk no more unless they could manage to warm themselves. "That is easily done," said the leader, giving a kick to a large tree. Flames broke out in the trunk, and before it had burnt up, they were all as hot as it had been summer. Then they started off to the place where the goats and the deer were to be found in the greatest numbers, and soon had killed as many as they wanted. But the leader killed the most, as he was the best shot. "Now we must cut up the game and divide it," he said, and so they did, each one taking his own share, and walking one behind the other, set out for the village. But when they reached a great river, the young man did not want the trouble of carrying his pack any further, and left it on the bank. "I'm going home another way," he told his companion, and taking another road he reached the village long before they did. "Have you returned with empty hands?" asked the old man, as the son had opened the door. "Have I ever done that, that you put me to such a question?" said the youth. "No, I have slain enough to feast us for many moons, but it was heavy, and I left my pack on the bank of the great river. Give me the arrows, and I will finish masking them, and you can go to the river and bring home the pack." So the old man rose and went, and strapped the meat to his shoulder. But as he was crossing the ford, the strap broke, and the pack fell into the river. He stooped to catch it, but it swirled past him. He clutched again, but in doing so, he overbalanced himself and was hurried into some rapids, where he was knocked against some rocks, and he sank to the ground and drowned, and his body was carried down the stream into smoother water when it rose to the surface again. But by this time it had lost all likeness of a man, and was changed into a piece of wood. The wood floated on, and the river got bigger and bigger, and entered a new country. There it was borne by the current close to the shore, and a woman who was down there washing her clothes caught it as it passed and drew it out, saying to herself, "What a nice smooth plank! I'll use it as my table to put my food upon." Then, gathering up her clothes, she took the plank with her into her hut. When her supper time came, she stretched the board across 2 strings which hung from the roof, and set upon it the pot containing the stew that smelt very good. The woman had been working all day, and was very hungry, so she took the biggest spoon and plunged it into the pot. But what was her astonishment and disgust when both the pot and food vanished instantly before her. "Oh, you horrid plank! You've brought me ill luck!" she cried, and taking it up she flung it away from her. The woman had been surprised before the disappearance of her food, but she was more astonished still when, instead of the plank, she beheld a baby. However, she was fond of children, and had none of her own, so she made up her mind that she would keep it and take care of it. The baby grew and throve as no baby in the country had ever done, and in 4 days he was a man, and as tall and strong as any of the braves in the tribe. "You have treated me well," he said, "and meat shall never fail to your house. But now I must go, for I have much work to do." Then he set out for his home. It took him many days to get there, and when he saw his son sitting in his place, his anger was kindled. His heart was stirred to take vengeance upon him, So he went out quickly to the forest and shed tears, and each tear became a bird. "Stay here till I want you," he said. Then he returned to the hut. "I saw some pretty birds high up in a tree yonder," he remarked, and the son answered, "Show me the way, and I will get them for dinner." The two went out together, and after walking about half an hour the old man stopped. "That is the tree," he said, and the son began to climb it. Now, a strange thing happened. The higher the young man climbed, the higher the birds seemed to be, and when he looked down at the earth below, he appeared no bigger than a star. Still, he tried to go back, but he could not, and though he could not see the birds any longer, he felt as if something were dragging him up and up. He thought that he had been climbing that tree for days, and perhaps he had, for suddenly a beautiful country, yellow with fields of maize, stretched before him, and he was gladly left the top of the tree and entered it. He walked through the maze without knowing where he was, and when he heard the sound of knocking, he saw two blind women crushing their food between two stones. He crept up to them on tiptoe, and when one old woman passed her dinner to the other, he held out his hand and took it and ate it for himself.
"How slow are you at eating that cake?" cried the other old woman at last. "I have given you your dinner, and what more do you want?" replied the second. "You did. At least I never got it," said the other. "I certainly thought you took it from me, but here is some more."
And again the young man stretched out his hand, and the two old women fell to quarreling afresh. But when it happened for the third time, the women suspected some trick, and one of them exclaimed,
"I'm sure there's a man here. Tell me, are you not my grandson?"
"Yes," answered the old man, who wished to please her, "and in return for your good dinner, I will see I cannot restore your sight, for I was taught the art of healing by the best medicine man in the tribe." And with that he left them, and wandered about until he found the herb he wanted. Then he hastened back to the old women, and begged them to boil him some water, and he threw the herb in. As soon as the pot began to sing, he took the lid off, and sprinkled the eyes of the women, and sight came back to them once more. There was no night in that country, so instead of going to bed very early, he would have done in his own hut, the young man took another walk. A splashing noise drew him down to the valley through which ran a large river, and up a waterfall where some salmon were leaping. How their silver sides glistened in the light, and how he longed to catch some of the great fellows. But how could he do it? He had beheld no one except the old women, and it was not likely that they would help him catch them. So with a sigh he turned away and went back to them, but as he walked, a thought struck him. He pulled out one of his hairs, which strung nearly to his waist, and it instantly became a strong line, nearly a mile long. "Weave me a net so that I may catch some salmon," said he, and they wove him a net he asked for, and for many weeks he watched the river, only going back to the old women when he wanted a fish cooked. At last one day, when he was eating his dinner, the old woman who always spoke first said to him,
"We have been very glad to see you, grandson, but now it is time that you went home."
And pushing aside a rock, he saw a deep hole, so deep that he could not see the bottom. Then he dragged a basket out of the house and tied a rope to it.
"Get in, wrap this basket round your head," they said, "and whatever happens, don't uncover it till you get to the bottom."
Then they bade him farewell, and he curled himself up in the basket. Down and down, down he went. Would he ever stop going? But when the basket did stop, the young man forgot what he had been told, and put his head out to see what was the matter. In an instant the basket moved, but to his horror, instead of going down, he felt himself being drawn upwards, and shortly after he beheld the face of the old woman.
"You will never see your wife and son if you do not go down as we bid," said they. "Now get in, and do not stir till you hear a crow calling."
This time the young man was wiser, and though the basket often stopped, the strange creature seemed to rest on him and pluck his blanket, He held it tight until he heard a crow calling. Then he flung off the blanket and sprang out, while the basket vanished in the sky. He walked on quickly down the track that led to the hut, when before he saw him, he saw his wife and his little son on her back.
"Oh, father is there at last!"
cried the boy, but the mother bade him cease the idle talking.
"But, mother, it is true, father is coming!"
repeated the child, and to satisfy him the woman turned around, and perceived her husband. Oh, how glad they were all to be together again! And when the wind whistled through the forest, and the snow stood in great banks around the door, the father used to take the little boy on his knee and tell him how he caught the salmon in the land of the sun. That story was confusing. That is 3 of the 7 stories for tonight. And we're coming up on ads. So we will go ahead and get into the ads. So I can get a full hour to see if I can do these other stories. Because I am not stopping until the book's done. So, I will see you in a few. Look at that big fluff ball. Big old black floofy boy. But welcome back. I hope you all had a good break and didn't have completely terrible ads. We've got 4 more stories to take care of. Ouch. So, let's get into it, shall we? Next one is That Blandish Martian. And the story, how the Stalos were tricked.
Mother, I've seen such a wonderful man,
said a little boy one day as he entered the hut in Lapland, bearing in his arms a bundle of sticks he had been sent out to gather.
Have you, my son? And what was he like?
Asked his mother. She took off the child's sheepskin coat and took it on the doorstep.
Well, as I was tired of stooping for sticks and was leaning against the tree to rest, I heard a noise of shush among the dried leaves. I thought perhaps it was a wolf, so I stood very still. But soon there came past a tall man, twice as tall as father, with a long red beard and a red tunic fastened with a silver girdle, from which hung a silver-handled knife. Behind him followed a great dog, which looked stronger than any wolf, or even a bear. Why are you so pale, mother? It was a Stalo,
answered she, her voice trembling.
Stalo the man-eater. You did well to hide, or you might have never come back. But remember that, though he is so tall and strong, he is very stupid, and many a lap has escaped the clutches by playing him some clever trick.
Not long after the mother and son had held this talk, it began to be whispered in the forest that the children of an old man named Pato had vanished one by one, and no one knew where. The unhappy father searched the country for miles round without being able to find so much as a shoe or a handkerchief to show him where they had passed. But at length a little boy came with news that he had seen the Stalo hiding behind a well, near which the children used to play. The boy had waited behind a clump of bushes to see what would happen, and by he noticed that the Stalo had laid a cunning trap in the path to the well, and that anyone who fell over it would roll into the water and drown there. And he was watched. The Pato's youngest daughter ran gaily down the path till her foot caught in the strings that were stretched across the steepest place. She slipped and fell. In another instant she had rolled into the water within reach of the Stalo. As soon as Pato heard this tale, his heart filled with rage, and he vowed to get his revenge. So he straightway took an old fur coat from the hook where he hung it, and putting it on, he went into the forest. He reached the path that led to the well. He looked hesitantly around to be sure that no one was watching him. Then he laid himself down as though he had been caught in a snare, and had rolled into the well, though he took care to keep his head out of the water. Very soon he heard a shh in the leaves, and there was the Stalo pushing his way through the undergrowth to see what chance he had got of dinner. At the first glimpse of Pato's head in the well, he laughed loudly, crying, "Ho ho! This time it is an old ass. I wonder how he will taste." And drawing Pato out of the well, he flung him across the shoulders and carried him home. Then he tied a cord around him and hung him over the fire to roast, while he was finishing a box that he was making before the door of the hut, which meant to hold Pato's flesh when it was cooked. In a very short time the box was so nearly done that it was only wanted a little more chipping out with an axe, but this part of the work was easily accomplished indoors, and he called to one of his sons who were lounging inside to bring him his tool. The young man looked everywhere, but could not find the axe. And for very good reason. Pato had managed to pick it up and hide it in his clothes. Stupid fellow, what was the use of you? Grumbled his father angrily, and he bade the first one, and then another his sons to fetch him the tool, but they had no better success than his brother. I must come myself, I suppose, said Stalo, putting aside the box. But meanwhile, Pado had slipped from the hook and concealed himself behind the door, so that, as Stalo stepped in, his prisoner raised the axe, and with one blow the ogre's head was rolling on the ground. His sons were so frightened at the sight that they all ran away. And in this manner, Pado avenged his dead children. But, though Stalo was dead, his 3 sons were still living, and not very far off either. They had gone to their mother, who was tending some reindeer on the pastures, and told her that, by some magic they knew not what, their father's head had rolled from his body, and they had been so afraid that something dreadful would happen to them that they had come to take refuge with her. The ogress said nothing. Long ago she had found out how stupid her sons were, so she sent them out to milk the reindeer, while she returned to the other house to bury her husband's body. Now, 3 days' journey from that hut on the pastures, 2 brothers, Hodno, dwell in a small cottage with their sister Lima, who tended a large herd of reindeer while they were out hunting. Of late it had been whispered from one another that the 3 young Stalos were to be seen on the pastures, but the Sodmo brothers did not disturb themselves. The danger seemed too far away. Unluckily, however, one day when Lima was left to herself in the hut, 3 Stalos came down and carried her off and the reindeer to their own cottage. The country was very lovely, and perhaps no one would have known which direction she had gone had not the girl managed to tie a ball of thread to the handle of the door at the back of the cottage, and let it trail behind her. Of course, the ball was not long enough to go all the way, but it lay on the edge of the snowy track, which led straight to the Stalos' house. When the brothers returned from their hunting, they found both the hut and sheds empty. Loudly they cried, "Lima! Lima!" But no voice answered them, and they fell to searching about, lest perchance their sister might have dropped some clue to guide them. At length their eyes dropped on the thread which lay on the snow, and they set out to follow it. On and on they went, when at length the thread stopped. The brothers knew that another day's journey would bring them to the Stalos' dwelling. Of course, they did not dare to approach it openly, for the Stalos had the strength of giants, and besides, there were 3 of them, and only 2 Sodnos. So they climbed into a bushy tree which overhung a well. "Perhaps our sister may be sent to draw water here," they said to each other. But it was not until the moon had risen that the sister came, and as she let down her bucket into the well, the leaves seemed to whisper, "Lima! Lima!" The girl started and looked up, but could see nothing, and in a moment the voice came again. "Be careful, take no notice. Fill your buckets, but listen carefully all the while, and we will tell you what to do that you may escape yourself and free the reindeer." So Lima bent over the well lower than before, seeming busier than ever. "You know," said her brother, "that when a Stalo finds that anything has been dropped into his food, he will not eat a morsel, but throws it to his dogs. Now, after the pot has been hanging for some time, the broth is nearly cooked. Just rake up a log of wood so that some of the ashes fly into the pot. Stalo soon will notice this, and will call you to give the food to the dogs. But instead, you must bring it straight to us, as it is 3 days since we have eaten or drunk. That is all you need to do for present." Then Lima took her buckets and carried them into the house, and did what her brothers had told her. They were so hungry that they ate the food up greedily without speaking, but when there was nothing left in the pot, the eldest one said, "Listen carefully to what I have to tell you. After the eldest Stalo has cooked and eaten a fresh supper, he will go to bed and sleep so soundly that not even a witch can wake him. You will hear him snoring a mile off, and then you must go into his room and pull off the iron mantle that covers him. Put it in the fire till it is almost red hot, and when that is done, come to us, and we will give you further directions."
"I will obey you in everything, dear brothers,"
answered Lima, and so she did. It happened that on this very evening the Stalos had driven some of the reindeer from the pasture and tied them up to the wall of the house so that they might be handy to kill for the next day's dinner. The two Sodnos had seen what they were doing and where the beasts were secured up, so at midnight, when all was still, they crept down from their tree and seized a reindeer by the horns, which they were locked together. The animals were frightened and began to neigh and kick as if they were frightened, and the noise became so great that even the eldest Stalo was awakened by it, and that was a thing which had never occurred before. Raising himself in his bed, he called to his youngest brother to go out and separate the reindeer, or that he would kill themselves. The young Stalo did as he was bid and left the house. But no sooner was he at the door than he was stabbed to the heart by one of the Sodnos, and fell without a sound. Then they went back to worry the reindeer, and the noise became as great as ever, and a second time the Stalo woke. "That boy does not be able to part the beasts," he answered his second brother. Just him. "The boy does not seem to be able to part the beasts," he cried to his second brother. "Go and help him, or I shall never get to sleep." So the brother went out, and in an instant he was struck dead and left by the house and sword of the eldest Sodno. Stalo waited in bed a little longer for things to get quiet, but as the clatter of the reindeer's horns was as bad as ever, he rose angrily from his bed, muttering to himself, "It is extraordinary that they cannot unlock themselves, but no one else seems to help them, so I suppose I must go and do it." Rubbing his eyes, he stood up on the floor and stretched his great arms and gave a yawn which shook the walls. The Sodnos heard it below and posted themselves, one at the big door and one at the door at the back, for they did not know which the enemy would come out at. The Stalo put his hand on the iron mantle from his bed, where it always lays, but the mantle was not there. He wondered where it could be, and who could have moved it, and after searching through all the rooms, he found it hanging over the kitchen fire. But the first touch burnt him so badly that he let it alone, and went with nothing, except a stick in his hand, through the back door. The young Sodno was standing ready for him, and as the Stalo passed the threshold, struck him with such a blow on the head that he rolled over with a crash, and never stirred again. The two Sodnos did not trouble about him, and quickly stripped the younger Stalos of their clothes, which they dressed themselves. Then they sat still till dawn should break, and they could find out of the Stalos' mother where the treasure was always hidden. With the first rays of the sun, the young Sodno went upstairs and entered the old woman's room. She was already up and dressed, and sitting by the window knitting. The young man crept in softly and crouched down on the floor, laying his head on her lap, and for a while kept silence, and then he whispered gently, "Tell me, dear mother, where did my eldest brother conceal his riches?" "Oh, that's a strange question. Surely you must know," answered she. "No, I've forgotten. My memory is so bad." "He dug a hole under the doorstep and placed it there," said she, and there was another pause. By and by, Sodno asked again, "And where will my second brother's money be?" "Don't you know that either?" cried the mother in surprise. "Oh, yes, I did once, but since it fell upon my head, I can remember nothing." "It is behind the oven," she answered, and again there was silence. "Mother, dear mother," went the young man at last, "I'm almost afraid to ask you, but I really have grown so stupid of late. Where did I hide my own money?" But at this question the old woman flew into a passion, and vowed that if she could find a rod she would bring his memory back to him. Luckily no rod was within reach, and the Sodno managed, after a little, to coax her back into a good humor. and at length she told him where the youngest Stalo had buried his treasure, under the very place she was sitting.
"Dear mother,"
said Lima, who had come in unseen and was kneeling in front of the fire.
"Dear mother, do you know who it is you have been talking with?"
The old woman started, but answered quietly, "It is a Sodno, I suppose."
"You have guessed right,"
replied Lima. The mother of the Stalos looked round for her iron cane, which she always used to kill her victims, but it was not there, for Lima had put it in the fire. "Where is my iron cane?" asked the old woman.
"There,"
answered Lima, pointing to the flames. The old woman sprang forwards and seized it, but her clothes caught fire, and in a few minutes she was burnt to ashes. And the Sodno brothers found the treasure, and they carried it and their sister and all the reindeer on to their own home, and were the richest men in Lapland. Yeah. Continuing. Our next story is Andras Baive. Once upon a time there lived in Lapland a man who was so very strong and swift of foot that nobody in his native town of Vadzo could come near him if they were running races in the summer evenings. The people of Vadzo were very proud of their champion, and thought that there was no one like him in the world, till by and by it came to their ears that there dwelt among the mountains of Lap Andras Baive by name, who was said by his friends to be even stronger and swifter than a bailiff. Of course, not a creature in Vadzo believed that, and declared that if the mountaineers happier to talk such nonsense, why let them? The winter was long and cold, and the thoughts of the villagers were much busier with wolves than of Andras Baive, who suddenly, on a frosty day, he made his appearance in the little town of Vadzo. The bailiff was delighted at this chance of proving his strength, and at once went out to seek Andras, and coax him into giving proof of his vigor. As he walked along, his eyes fell upon a big 8-oared boat that lay upon the shore, and his face shone with pleasure. "That is the very thing," laughed he. "I will make him jump over that boat." And Andras was quite ready to accept the challenge, and they soon settled the terms of the wager. He who could jump over the boat without so much as touching it with his heel has to be the winner, and would get a large sum of money as a prize. So, followed by many villagers, the two men walked down to the sea. An old fisherman was chosen to stand near the boat to watch for fair play, and to hold the stakes, and Andras, as a stranger, was told to jump first. Going back to the flag which had been struck in the sand to mark the starting place, he ran forward with his head thrown back and cleared the boat with a mighty bound. The lookers-on cheered him, for indeed he deserved it, but they waited anxiously all the same to see what the bailiff would do. On he came, taller than Andras by several inches, but heavier of build. He too sprang well and high, but came down his heel just grazed the edge of the boat. Dead silence reigned amongst the townfolks, but Andras only laughed and said carelessly, "Just a little too short, bailiff. Next time you must do better than that." The bailiff turned red with anger at his rival's scornful words, and answered quickly, "Next time you will have something harder to do." And turning his back on his friends, he went skulkily home. Andras, putting the money he had earned in his pocket, went home also. The following spring, Andras happened to be driving his reindeer along a great fjord in the west of Vadslo, and a boy who met him hastened to tell the bailiff that his enemy was only a few miles off. And the bailiff, disguising himself as a Stalo, or ogre, called his son and his dog, and rode away across the fjord in the place where the boy had seen Andras. Now, the mountaineer was lazily walking along the sands, thinking of a new hut that he was building with the money that he had won the day of his lucky jump. He wandered on, his eyes fixed on the sands, so that he did not see the bailiff drive his boat behind a rock, while he changed himself into a heap of wreckage which floated on the waves. A stumble over the stone called Andras to himself, and looking up he beheld a mass of wreckage. "Dear me, I may have some use of that," he said, and hastened down to the sea, waiting till he could lay hold of some stray rope which might float towards him. Suddenly, he could not have told why, a nameless fear seized upon him, and he fled away from the shore as if for his life. As he ran, he heard the sound of a pipe, such as only ogres of the Stalo kind were wont to use, and there flashed into his mind what the bailiff had said when they had jumped the boat. "Next time you will have something harder to do." And it was no wreckage after all that he had seen, but the bailiff himself. It happened on that long summer nights up in the mountain, when the sun never slept, that it was very difficult to sleep. Andras had spent many hours in the study of magic, and this stood him in good stead now. The instant he heard Stalo music, he wished himself to become as fleet of a reindeer, and in the guise of that he galloped like the wind for several miles. Then he stopped to take breath and find out what his enemy was doing. Nothing he could see, but to his ears the notes of the pipe floated over the plain, and ever as he listened, it drew nearer. A cold shiver shook Andras, and this time he wished himself the feet of a reindeer calf. For when a reindeer calf has reached the age he begins to first lose his hair on his feet, he is so swift that neither beast nor bird can come near him. The reindeer calf is the swiftest of all things living. Yes, but not so swift as a Stalo, as Andras found out when he stopped to rest and heard the pipe playing. For a moment his heart sank, and he gave himself up for dead, till he remembered that, not far off, there were two little lakes joined together by a short trough of a very broad river. In the middle of the river lay a stone that was always covered with water, except in the dry seasons, and as the winter's rains had been heavier, he felt sure that not even the top of it could be seen. The next minute, if anyone had been looking that way, he would have beheld a small reindeer calf speeding northwards, and by giving a great spring, which landed him in the midst of the stream. But instead of sinking to the bottom, he paused a second to steady himself. Then he gave a second spring, which landed him on the further shore. He ran a little on the hill, and saw down, and began to neigh loudly, so that a Sato might know exactly where he was. "Ah, there you are!" cried the Sato, appearing on the opposite bank. "For a moment I really thought I had lost you." "No such luck," answered Andras, shaking his head sorrowfully, and this time he had taken his own shape again. "Well, but I don't see how I am to get you," said the Stalo, looking up and down. "Jump over as I did," said Andras. "It is quite easy." "But I could not jump this river. I don't know how you did," replied the Stalo. "I should be ashamed to say such things," exclaimed Andras. "Do you mean to tell me that to jump, which is the weakest that boy could do and take nothing of, is beyond your strength?" The Stalo grew very red and angry when he heard these words, just as Andras had meant him to do. He bounded into the air and fell straight into the river. Not that it would have mattered, for he was a good swimmer, but Andras drew out the bow and arrows that every lad carries, and took aim at him. His aim was good, for this time the Stalo jumped so high to the other side that the arrow passed between his fingers and thumb. Then Andras aimed a third arrow a little over the Stalo's head, when he sprang up just an instant too soon, and it hit him between his ribs. Mortally wounded as he was, the Stalo was not yet dead, and managed to swim to the shore, stretching himself on the sand, and said slowly to Andras, "Will you promise me to give an honorable burial? When my body is laid in the grave, go to my boat across the ford, and take whatever you find in my house which belongs to me. My dog you must kill, but spare my son, Andras." Then he died, and Andras sailed his boat across to the fjord and found the dog and boy. The dog, a fierce, wicked-looking creature, he slew with one blow from his fist, for it was known that if a Stalos' dog licks the blood that flows from his dead master's wounds, the Stalo comes back to life again. That is why no real Stalo is ever seen without his dog. But the bailiff, being only half a Stalo, had forgotten him when he went to the little lakes to search for Andras. Next, Andras put the gold and jewels on which he found on the boat into his pockets, and bidding the boy to get in, he pushed it off from shore, and leaving the little craft to drift as it would, while he himself ran home. And he soon married a rich wife whose parents would not have him as a son-in-law when he was poor, and the two lived happily ever after. Okay, that was just a little confusing. Our next story. The White Slipper. Once upon a time there lived a king who had a daughter just 15 years old. And what a daughter! Even the mothers who had daughters of their own could not help allowing that the princess was much more beautiful and graceful than any of them. And as for the fathers, if one of them ever beheld her by accident, he could talk of nothing else for a whole day afterwards. Of course, the king, whose name was Bellicin, was complete slave of his little girl from the moment he lifted her from the arms of her dead mother. Indeed, he did not seem to know that there was anyone else in the world to love. Now, Diamantina, for that was her name, did not reach her 15th birthday without proposals for marriage from every country under heaven. But be the suitor who he might, the king always said nay. Behind the palace a large garden stretched away to the foot of some hills, and more than one river flowed through. Here the princess would come each evening towards sunset, attended by her ladies, and gather herself the flowers that were to adorn her rooms. She also brought with her a pair of scissors to cut off the dead blooms, and a basket to put them in, so that the sun rose the next morning he might see nothing unsightly. When she was finished with her task, she would take a walk through town, so that the poor people might have a chance to speak with her, and telling her of their troubles, and then she would seek out her father, and together they would consult over the best means of helping those who really needed it. But what else does this have to do with the White Slipper? My readers might ask. Have patience, you'll see. Next to his daughter, Baldiston loved hunting, and it was accustomed to spend several mornings each week chasing the boars which abounded in the countries a few miles from the city. One day, rushing downhill as fast as he could go, he put his foot into a hole and fell, and rolling into a rocky pit of brambles. The king's wounds were not very severe, but his face and hands were cut and torn, and his feet were a worse plight still, for instead of proper hunting boots, he only wore sandals, which enabled him to run more swiftly. In a few days the king was as well as ever, and the signs of the scratches were almost gone, but one foot remained very sore, where a thorn had pierced deeply, and it festered. The best doctors in the kingdom treated it with all their skill. They bathed and poulticed and bandaged, but it was in vain. The foot only grew worse and worse, and became daily more swollen and painful. After everyone had tried his own particular cure and found it fail, there came news of a wonderful doctor in some distant land who had healed the most astonishing diseases. On inquiring, it was found that he never left the walls of his own city, and expected his patients to come to see him, but by dint of offering a large sum of money, the king persuaded the famous physician to undertake the journey to his own court. On his arrival, the doctor was led at once into the king's presence and made a careful examination of his foot. "Alas, your majesty," he said, when he was finished, "the wound is beyond the power of man to heal, but though I cannot cure it, I can at least deaden the pain and enable you to walk without so much suffering." "Oh, if only you can do that," cried the king, "I shall be grateful to you for all my life. Give me your own orders, and they shall be obeyed." "Then let your majesty bid the royal shoemaker to make a shoe of goatskin, very loose and comfortable, while I prepare a varnish to paint over it, of which I alone have the secret." So saying, the doctor bowed himself out, leaving the king more cheerful and hopeful than he had been for so long. The days passed very slowly with him during the making of the shoe and the preparation of the varnish, but on the 8th morning the physician appeared, bringing with him a shoe in a case. He drew it out and slipped on the king's foot, and over the goatskin he had rubbed the polish so white that the snow itself was not more dazzling. "While you wear the shoe, you will feel no pain in the slightest," said the doctor, "for the balsam with which I have rubbed the inside and out, besides its healing balm, the quality of the strengthening of material it touches, so that, even when your majesty were to live 1,000 years, you would find the slipper just as fresh at the end of the time as it is now." The king was so eager to put it on that he hardly gave the physician time to finish. He snatched it from the case and thrust his foot in it, nearly weeping for joy when he found he could walk and run easily as any beggar boy. "What can I give you?" he cried, holding out both hands to the man who had worked this miracle. "Stay with me, and I will heap you the greatest riches you have ever dreamed of." But the doctor said he would accept nothing more than what had been agreed to, and he must return at once to his own country, where many sick people were waiting on him. So King Balanson, with great content to himself, ordered the physician to be treated with royal honors, desiring that an escort should attend him on his way home. For 2 years, everything went smoothly at court. To King Balanson and his daughter, the sun rose no sooner than it seemed time for it to set. Now, the king's birthday fell in the month of June, and as weather happened to be unusually fine, he told the princess to celebrate it in any way that pleased her. Diamantina was very fond of being on the river, and she was delighted at this chance of delighting her own tastes. She would have merry-making such as never had been seen before, and in the evening, when they were tired of sailing and rowing, there should be music and dancing, plays and fireworks. At the very end, before the people went home, every poor person should be given a loaf of bread, and every girl who has been married within a year a new dress. The great day appeared to Diamantina to be long in coming, but like other days, it came at last. Before the sun was fairly up in the heavens, the princess, too full of excitement to stay in the palace, was walking about the streets so covered with precious stones that you had to shade your eyes before you could look at her. By and by a trumpet sounded, and she hurried home, only to appear again a few moments later by the side of her father down to the river. Here a splendid barge was waiting for them, and from it they watched all sorts of races and feasts of swimming and diving. When these were over, the barge proceeded up the river to the field where dancing and concerts were to take place. And after the prizes had been given away to the winners, and loaves of bread and dresses were distributed by the princess, they bade farewell to their guests, and turned to step into the barge which was to carry them back to the palace. Then a dreadful thing happened. The king stepped on board the boat, and one of the sandals of the white slipper, which had gotten loose, caught in a nail that was sticking out, which caused the king to stumble. The pain was great, and unconsciously he turned and shook his foot so that the sandals gave way, and in a moment the precious shoe was in the river. It had all occurred so quickly that nobody had noticed the loss of the slipper, not even the princess, whom the king's cries speedily brought to his side.
"What is the matter, my dear father?"
asked she, but the king could not tell her. He only managed to gasp out, "My shoe! My shoe!" While the sailors stood around staring, thinking that his majesty had suddenly gone mad. Seeing her father's eyes fixed on the stream, Diamantina looked hastily in that direction. There, dancing on the current, was the point of something white, which became more and more distant the longer they watched it. The king could bear the sight no more. Besides, now that the healing ointment and the shoe had been removed, the pain of his foot was as bad as ever. He gave a sudden cry and staggered, and fell to the bulwarks of the boat. Fell over the bulwarks into the water. In an instant the river was covered with bobbing heads, all swimming their fastest toward the king, who had been carried far down by the swift current. At one length, one swimmer, stronger than the rest, seized hold of his tunic and drove him to the bank, where 1,000 eager hands were ready to haul him out. He was carried, unconscious, to the side of his daughter, who had fainted with terror on seeing her father disappear below the surface. and together they were placed in the coach and driven to the palace, where the best doctors in the city were awaiting their arrival. In a few hours the princess was well as ever, but the pain, the wetting, the shock of an accident, all severely told on the king, and for 3 days he lay in a high fever. Meanwhile his daughter herself, nearly mad with grief, gave orders that the white slipper should be sought for far and wide, and so it was. But even the cleverest divers could find no trace of it at the bottom of the river. When it became clear that the slipper must be carried out to the current of the sea, Diamantina turned her thoughts elsewhere and sent messengers in search for the doctor who had brought relief to her father, begging him to make another slipper as fast as possible to supply the place of the one which was lost. But the messengers returned with the sad news that the doctor had died some weeks before, and what was worse, his secret had died with him. In his weakness, this intelligence had such an effect on the king that the physicians feared he would become as ill as before. He could barely be persuaded to touch food, and all night long he lay moaning, partly with pain and partly at his own folly for not having begged the doctor to make him several dozens of white slippers, so that in the case of accidents might happen he would have one to put on. However, by and by he saw that it was no use weeping and wailing, and commanded that they should search for his lost treasure more diligently than ever. What a sight the river banks presented in those days! It seemed as if all the people in the country were gathered on them. But this second search was no more fortunate than the first, unless the king issued a proclamation that whoever found the missing slipper should be made heir to the crown, and should marry the princess. Now, many daughters would have rebelled at being disposed of in such a manner, and it was admitted that Diamantina's heart sank when she heard what the king had done. Still, she loved her father so much that she desired his comfort more than anything else in the world, so she said nothing, and only bowed her head. Of course, the result of the proclamation was that the river banks became more crowded than ever, for all the princess's suitors from distant lands flocked to the spot, each hoping he might be the lucky finder. Many times a shining stone at the bottom of the stream was taken for the slipper itself, and every evening saw a band of dripping, downcast men turning homewards. But one youth always lingered longer than the rest, and at night you could still see him engaging in the search, though his clothes stuck to his skin and his teeth chattered. One day when the king was lying on his bed, racked with pain, he heard the noise of scuffle in the antechamber. He rang a golden bell that stood by his side to summon one of his servants. "Sire," answered one of the servants, when the king inquired what was the matter, "the noise you heard was caused by a young man from the town, who has had such impudence to come here and ask if he may measure your majesty's foot, as to make you another slipper in place of the lost one." "And what have you done with the youth?" said the king. "The servants pushed him out of the palace, and added a few blows to teach him not to be so insolent," replied the man. "Then they did very ill," replied the king, with a frown. "He came here from kindness, and there was no reason to maltreat him." "Oh, my lord, he had the audacity to touch his majesty's sacred person, for he, a good-for-nothing boy, a mere shoemaker's apprentice, perhaps, and even if he could to make shoes to perfection, there would be no use without the soothing balm." The king remained silent for a few moments. Then he said, "Never mind, go and fetch the youth and bring him to me. I will gladly try any remedy that may relieve my pain." So, soon afterwards, the youth, who had not gone far from the palace, was caught and ushered into the king's presence. He was tall and handsome, and though he professed to make shoes, his manners were good and modest, and he bowed low as he begged the king not only to allow him to measure his foot, but also suffer him to place a healing plaster over the wound. Valenson was pleased with the young man's voice and appearance, and thought that he looked as if he knew what he was doing, so he stretched out his bad foot, which the youth examined with great attention, then gently laid on the plaster. Very shortly the ointment began to soothe the sharp pain, and the king, whose confidence increased every moment, begged the young man to tell him his name. "I have no parents. They died when I was 6, sire," replied the youth modestly. Everyone in town calls me Guillermo, because when I was little I went singing through the world in spite of my misfortunes. Luckily for me, I was born to be happy. And you really think you can cure me? Asked the king. Completely, my lord, answered Guillermo. And how long do you think it will take? It is not an easy task, but I will try to finish it in a fortnight, replied the youth. A fortnight to the kings seemed a long time to make one slipper, but he only said, Do you need anything to help you? Only a good horse, if your majesty will be kind enough to give me one, answered Gilgero. And the reply was so unexpected that the courtiers had hardly restrained their smiles, while the king stared silently. You shall have a horse, he said at last, and I shall expect you back in a fortnight. If you fulfill your promise, you know your reward. If not, I will have you flogged for your impudence. Gilgero bowed and turned to leave the palace, followed by the jeers and scoffs of everyone he met. But he paid no heed, for he had got what he wanted. He waited in front of the gates till a magnificent horse was led up to him. Vaulting to the saddle with ease, which rather surprised the attendant, rode quickly out of town amidst the jests of the assembled crowd, who had heard of his audacious proposal. And while he was on his way, he let pause a moment and tell who he was. Both mother and father had died before the boy was 6 years old, and he had lived for many years with his uncle, whose life had been passed in study of chemistry. He could leave no money to his nephew, as he had a son of his own, and he taught him all he knew. And at his death, Gilgero entered the office, where he worked for many hours daily. In his spare time, instead of playing with the other boys, he passed hours poring over books. Because he was timid and liked to be alone, he was held by everyone to be, well, a little mad. Therefore, when it became known that he had promised to cure the king's foot, and had ridden away, no one knew where, a roar of laughter and mockery rang through the town, and jeers and scoffing words were sent after him. But if only they had known where Giliero's thoughts were when they had thought him madder than ever. The real truth was that, on the morning when the princess had walked through the streets before making holiday on the river, Gilero had seen her from his window, and had fallen in love with her straight away. Of course, he felt quite hopeless. It was absurd to imagine that apothecary's nephew could ever marry a king's daughter, so he did his best to forget her, and study harder than before, until the royal proclamations suddenly filled him with hope. When he was free, he no longer spent the precious moments poring over books, but like the rest, he might have been seen wandering along the banks of the river, or diving into the stream after someone had lay glistening in clear water, which often turned out to be a white pebble or maybe a bit of glass. At the end, he understood that it was not the river that he could win the princess, and turning to his books for comfort, he studied even harder. There's an old proverb that says, Everything comes to him who knows how to wait. It is not all men who know how to wait, any more than it is all men who learn by experience. But Gilgero was one of few who, instead of thinking his life wasted because he could not have the thing he wanted most, he tried to busy himself in other directions. So one day, when he expected it least, his reward came to him. He happened to be reading a book many hundreds of years old, which told of remedies of all kinds of diseases. Most of them he knew, and he merely invented by old women, who sought to prove themselves wiser than other people. But at length he came to something which caused him to sit up straight in his chair, and made his eyes brighten. There was this description of a balsam, which would cure every kind of sore wound, distilled from a plant only to be found in a country so distant that it would take a man on foot 2 months to go and come back. When I say that the book declared that the balsam could heal every sort of sore, there were a few against which it was powerless, and it gave certain signs of which these might be known. This was the reason why Guillermo demanded to see the king's foot before he would undertake to cure it, and to obtain admittance he gave out what was shoemaker. However, the dreaded signs were absent, and his heart bounded at the thought that the princess was within reach. Perhaps she was, but a great deal had yet to be accomplished, and he allowed himself a very short time in which to do it. He spared his horse only so much as was needful, yet it took him 6 days to reach the spot where the plant grew. The thick wood lay in front of him, and then fastened the bridle gently to a tree. He flung himself on his hands and knees and began to search for his treasure. Many times he fancied it was close to him, and many times it turned out to be something else, but at last, when the light was fading and he had almost given up hope, he came upon a large bed of a plant right under his feet. Trembling with joy, he picked every scrap he could see and placed it into his pocket. Then, mounting his horse, he galloped quickly back towards the city. It was night when he entered the gates, and the 15th days allotted were not up until the next day. His eyes were heavy with sleep, and his body ached with a long strain, but without pausing to rest, he kindled a fire on his hearth, and quickly filling a pot with water, he threw in the herbs and let them boil. After that, he lay down and fell sound asleep. The sun was shining when he woke, and he jumped up and ran to the pot. The plant had disappeared, and in its stead was a thick syrup, just as the book had said there would be. He lifted the syrup out with a spoon, and after spreading it in the sun till it was partly dry, poured it into a small flask of crystal. Next he washed himself thoroughly and dressed himself in his best clothes, and putting the flask in his pocket, he set out to the palace and begged to see the king without delay. Now, Valentin, whose foot had been much less painful since Gilguero had wrapped it in the plaster, was counting the days to see the young man's return. When he was told that Gilguero was there, he ordered him to be admitted at once. As he entered, the king raised himself eagerly on his pillows, but his face fell when he saw no signs of a slipper. "You've failed, then?" he said, throwing up his hands in despair. "I hope not, your majesty. I think not," answered the youth, and drawing the flask from his pocket, he poured 2 or 3 drops onto the wound. "Repeat this for 3 nights, and you will find yourself cured," he said. Before the king had time to thank him, he bowed himself out. Of course, the news spread through the city, and men and women never tired of calling Gilguero an impostor, and prophesied that at the end of 3 days would see him in prison, if not on the scaffold. But Gilguero paid no heed to their hard words, and no more did the king, who took care that no hand but his own should apply the healing balsam. On the 4th morning the king awoke, and instantly stretched out his wounded foot that he might prove the truth or falsehood of Gilguero's recipe. The wound had certainly cured that side. But how about the other? Yes, that was cured also, and not even a scar was left to show where it had been. Was ever any king so happy as Valentin when he satisfied himself with this? Lightly as a deer, he jumped from his bed and began to turn head over heels to perform all sorts of antics, as to make sure that his foot was in truth as well as it looked. And he was quite tired. He sent for his daughter, and bade his courtiers to bring the lucky man to his room. "He really is young and very handsome," said the princess to herself, heaving a sigh of relief that it was not some dreadful old man who had healed her father. And while the king was announcing to his courtiers the wonderful cure had been made, Diamantina was thinking that if Gilguero looked so well in his common dress, how much improved by the splendid garments of a king's son. However, she held her peace and only watched with amusement when the courtiers, knowing there was no help for it, did homage and obeisance to the chemist's boy. Then they brought to Gilguero a magnificent tunic of green velvet bordered with gold, and a cap with 3 white plumes stuck in it. And at the sight of him so arrayed, the princess fell in love with him at a moment. The wedding was fixed to take place in 8 days, and at the ball afterwards, nobody danced so long or so lightly as King Valentin. Ouch. 10 minutes until the ads. We're on the last story. But we can do it! What's with all these snowman Pokemon things? Anyway. Our final story of the Orange Fairy Book, The Magic Book. There was once an old couple named Peter and Kirsten who had an only son named Hans. From the time he was a little boy, he had been told that on his 16th birthday he must go out into the world and serve his apprenticeship. So, one fine summer morning, he started off to seek his fortune with nothing but the clothes he wore on his back. For many hours he trudged on merrily, now and then stopping to drink from some clear spring or to pick up some ripe fruit from a tree. Then little wild creatures peeped at him from beneath bushes, and he nodded and smiled and wished them good morning. After he had been walking for some time, he met an old white-bearded man who was coming along a footpath. The boy would not step aside, and the man was determined not to do so either, so they ran against each other with a bump.
"It seems to me," said the old fellow, "that the boy should give way to an old man."
"The path is for me as well as for you," answered young Hans saucily, for he had never been taught politeness.
"Well, that's true," answered the other mildly. "And where are you going?"
"I'm going into service," said Hans.
"Then you can come and serve me,"
replied the man. Well, Hans could do that, but what would his wages be?
£2 a year, and nothing but to keep some rooms clean," said the newcomer.
This seems to Hans to be easy enough, so he agreed to enter the old man's service, and they set out together. On their way they crossed a deep valley and came to a mountain where the old man opened a trap door, and bidding Hans follow him, he crept in and began to go down a long flight of steps. When they got to the bottom, Hans saw a large number of rooms, lit by many lamps and full of beautiful things. While he was looking around, the old man said to him,
"Now, you know what you have to do. You must keep these rooms clean, and strew sand on the floor every day. There's a table where you will always find food and drink, and there's your bed. You see, there are a great many suits of clothing hanging on the wall, and you may wear what you please, but remember you are never to open this locked door. If you do, ill will befall you. Farewell, I'm going away again, and cannot tell you when I may return."
No sooner had the man disappeared than Hans sat down to a good meal, and after that he went to bed and slept until morning. At first he could not remember what had happened to him, but by and by he jumped up and went into the rooms, which he examined carefully. "How foolish to bid to put sand on the floors," he thought, "when there is nobody here but myself. I shall do nothing of the sort." And so he shut the doors quickly and only cleaned and set in order his own room. After the first few days he felt that it was unnecessary too, because no one came there to see if the rooms were clean or not. At last he did no work at all, but just sat and wondered what was behind the locked door, till he determined to go and look for himself. The key turned easily in the lock. Hans entered, half frightened at what he was doing, and the first thing he beheld was a heap of bones. That was not very cheerful, and he was going out again when his eye fell on a shelf of books. He was a good way in passing time, he thought, and he was fond of reading, and he took one of the books from the shelf. It was all about magic, and told you could change yourself into anything in the world you liked. Could anything be more exciting or useful? So he put it in his pocket and ran quickly away out of the mountain by a little door which had been left open. When he got home, his parents asked him what he had been doing and where he had got the fine clothes he wore. "Oh, I earned them myself," answered he. "You never earned them in such short of a time," said his father. "Be off with you. I won't keep you here. I will have no thieves in my house." "Well, I only came to help you," replied the boy sulkily. "Now I'll be off as you wish, but tomorrow morning when you rise you will see a great dog at the door. Do not drive it away, but take it to the castle and sell it to the Duke, and they will give you $10 for it. Only you must bring the strap you lead it with back to the house." Sure enough, the next day a dog was standing at the door, waiting to be let in. The old man was rather afraid of letting get into trouble, but his wife urged him to sell the dog as the boy had bidden him. So he took it up to the castle and sold it to the Duke for $10. But he did not forget to take off the strap which had led the animal and carry it home. When he got there, old Kirsten met him at the door. "Well, Peder, have you sold the dog?" asked she. "Yes, Kirsten, and I've brought back $10, as the boy told us," answered Peder. "Aye, that's fine," said his wife. "Now go and see what one gets by doing one as one bid. If you had not been for me, you would have driven the dog away, and you should have lost the money. After all, I always know what is best." "Nonsense," cried her husband. "Women always think they know best. I should have sold the dog. The same, just whatever you told me. Put the money away in the safe place, and don't talk so much." The next day Hans came again, but though everything had turned out as he had foretold, he found that his father was not quite satisfied. "Be off with you," he said. "You'll get us into trouble." "I haven't helped you enough yet," replied the boy. "Tomorrow there will be a great fat cow as big as a house. Take it to the king's palace and you'll get as much as $1,000 for it. Only you must unfasten the halter you lead it and bring it back here. And don't return by the high road, but through the forest." The next day, when the couple rose, they saw an enormous head looking through their bedroom window, and behind it was a cow which was nearly as big as their hut. Kirsten was wild with joy to think the money the cow would bring them. "But how are you going to put the rope over the head?" asked she. "Wait and you'll see, mother," answered her husband. And Peder took the ladder that led up to the hayloft and set it against the cow's neck, and he climbed up and slipped the rope over its head. When he made sure that the noose was fast, he started to the palace, and met the king himself walking on the grounds. "I heard that the princess is going to be married," said Peters, "so I brought your majesty a cow which is bigger than any cow you've ever seen. Will your majesty deign to buy it?" The king, in truth, had never seen so large a beast, and he willingly paid the $1,000 for it, which was the price demanded. But Peder remembered to take off the halter before he left. After he had gone, the king sent a butcher and told him to kill the animal for the wedding feast. The butcher got ready a pole-axe, but just as he was going to strike, the cow changed itself into a dove and flew away, and the butcher just stood staring after it as if he had turned to stone. However, as the dove could not be found, he was obliged to tell the king what had happened, and the king sent his dispatchers to capture the old man and bring him back. But Peder was safe in the woods and could not be found. When at last he felt the danger was over, he went back home, and Kirsten nearly fainted with joy at the sight of the money he had brought home. "Now that we're rich people, we must build a bigger house," cried she, and was vexed to find when Peder only shook his head and said, "No, if we did that, people would talk, and they've got their wealth by ill-doing." A few mornings later, Hans came again. "Be off before you get us into trouble," said his father. "So far money's come right enough, but I don't trust it." "Don't worry over that, father," said Hans. "Tomorrow you will find a horse outside by the gate. Ride it to market and you will get $1,000 for it. Only don't forget to loosen the bridle when you sell it." Well, in the morning, there was the horse. Kirsten had never seen so fine an animal. "Take care that you don't hurt you, Peder," she said. "Nonsense, wife," answered he crossly. "When I was a lad I lived with horses, and could ride anything for 20 miles round." But that was not quite the truth, for he had never mounted a horse in his life. So the animal was quiet enough, so Peder got safely to market on its back. There he met a man who offered $999 for it. But Peder would take nothing less than 1,000. At last there came an old gray-bearded man who looked at the horse and agreed to buy it. But the moment he touched it, the horse began to kick and plunge. "I must take the bridle off," said Peder. "It is not to be sold with the animal, and this is usually the case." "I'll give you $100 for the bridle," said the old man, taking out his purse. "No, I can't sell it," replied the man's father. $500. No, 1,000. At this splendid offer, Petter's prudence gave way, and it was, shame to let so much money go away. So he agreed to accept it, but he could hardly hold the horse. It became so unmanageable. So he gave the animal charge to the old man and went home with $2,000. Harrison, of course, was delighted at this new piece of good fortune, and insisted that a new house should be built and land bought. This time Peter considered, and soon they had quite a fine farm. Meanwhile, the old man rode off with his new purchase, and when he came to a smithy and asked the smith to forge shoes for the horse, the smith proposed that they should first have a drink together, if the horse was tied up by the spring whilst they went indoors. The day was hot, and both men were thirsty, and found them thirsty. And besides, they had much to say. So the hours slipped by and found them still talking. Then a servant girl came out to fetch a pail of water, and, being a kind-hearted lass, she gave some to the horse to drink. What was her surprise when the animal said to her, "Take off my bridle, and you will save my life."
"I dare not," she said. "Your master will be so angry."
"He cannot hurt you," said the horse, "and you will save my life." At that she took off the bridle, and nearly fainted with astonishment, when the horse turned into a dove and flew away, just as the old man came out of the house. Directly he saw what happened, he changed himself into a hawk and flew after the dove. Over the woods and fields they went, and at length they reached the king's palace, surrounded by beautiful gardens. The princess was walking with her attendants in the rose garden when the dove turned itself into a gold ring and fell at her feet.
"Why, here is a ring!" she cried. "Where could it have come from?"
And picked it up and put it on her finger. As she did, the hillman lost his power over Hans, for, of course, you understand that he had been the dog, the cow, the horse, and the dove.
"Well, that is really strange," said the princess. "It fits me as though it had been made for me."
Just at that moment up came the king.
"Look what I've found!" cried his daughter.
"Well, that is not worth very much, my dear," he said. "Besides, you have rings enough, I should think."
"Never mind, I like it," said the princess.
But as soon as she was alone, to her amazement, the ring suddenly left her finger and became a man. You can imagine how frightened she was, as indeed anyone would have been, but in an instant the man became a ring again, and then turned into a man, and so it went on for some time until she began to get used to the sudden changes. "I'm sorry I frightened you," said Hans, when he thought he could safely speak to the princess without making her scream. "I took refuge with you because of the old hillman whom I offended was trying to kill me, and here I am safe."
"You had better stay here, then,"
said the princess. So Hans stayed, and he and she became good friends, though, of course, he only became a man when no one else was present. This was all very well, but one day as they were walking together, the king happened to enter the room, and although Hans quickly changed himself into a ring again, it was too late. The king was enraged. "So is this why you've refused to marry all the kings and princes who have sought your hand?" he asked. And without waiting for her to speak, he commanded that his daughter should be walled up in the summer house and starved to death with her lover. That evening, the poor princess, still wearing the ring, was put into the summer house with enough food to last for 3 days, and the door was bricked up. But at the end of the week or two, the king thought it was time to give her a grand funeral, in spite of her bad behavior, and he opened the summer house, and he could hardly believe his eyes when he found that the princess was not there, nor Hans either. Instead, there lay at the feet a large hole, big enough for 2 people to pass through. Now, what had happened was this. When the princess and Hans had given hope and cast themselves down to the ground to die, they fell down into this hole, and right through the earth as well. And at last they tumbled into a castle built of pure gold on the other side of the world, and there they lived happily, but this, of course, the king knew nothing of. Will anyone see where this... Will anyone go down and see what this passage leads to? He asked, turning to his guards and courtiers. I will reward splendidly the man who is brave enough to explore it. For a long time, nobody answered. The hole was dark and deep, and if it had a bottom, no one could see it. At length, the soldier, who was a careless sort of fellow, offered himself for the service and cautiously lowered himself into the darkness. But in a moment, too, he fell down, down, down. He was going to fall forever, he wondered. Oh, how thankful he was to reach the end in the castle and to meet the princess and Hans, looking quite well, not at all as if they had been starved. They began to talk, and the soldier told them that the king was very sorry for the way he had treated his daughter, and wished day and night that he could have her back. Then they all took a ship and sailed home, and when they came to the princess's country, Hans disguised himself as the sovereign of a neighboring kingdom, and went up to the palace alone. He was given a hearty welcome by the king, who prided himself on his hospitality, and a banquet was commanded in his honor. That evening, whilst they were drinking their wine, Hans said to the king, I have heard the fame of your majesty's kingdom, and I have travelled from far to ask your counsel. A man in my country has buried his daughter alive because she loved a youth who was born a peasant. How shall I punish this unnatural father? For it was left to me to give judgment. The king, who was still truly grieved for his daughter's loss, answered him quickly. I burned him alive and strew his ashes over the kingdom. Hans looked at him steadily for a moment, then threw off his disguise. You are the man, he said, and I am he who loved your daughter, and became the gold ring on her finger. She is safe and waiting not far from here, but you have pronounced judgment on yourself. Then the king fell on his knees and begged for mercy, and as he had in other respects been a good father, they forgave him. The wedding of Hans and the princess was celebrated with great festivities, which lasted a month. As for the hillman, he intended to be present, but while he was walking on the street which led to the palace, a stone fell loose and landed on his head, killing him. So Hans and the princess lived in peace and happiness in all their days, and when the old king died, they reigned in his stead. And that is the book, people. Now, find someone to read. Just hear those sleigh bells sing, thing, ring, ting, ting, like two. Ah, that's lovely weather for a sleigh ride together with you. Well, I see dusk is on. Why is it not showing me the list of peoples? No. My thing's lagging again. I want to show more. So, while we're here, I might stream a little early on the 22nd. Well, let me check the calendars. I don't know what date it is. Okay. The 22nd I might stream. 23rd, I'm going to be on the road all the day, apparently. Christmas Eve, I will try to have my Christmas stories playing. And the Santa Tracker will be on. As for the day after Christmas, I might not be able to stream then either. So this might be second to last stream for the year. Which is kind of strange to say. But seeing as this is the first stream of my 4th year as an affiliate, I just want to thank you all for coming around and listening to this old dog tell stories and attempt to play games. So, these are the raid messages, if I can type, because I'm having trouble typing. And if anything else, I will see you Monday, and if not Monday, I'll see you next year. So, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. I might try to stream New Year's Eve, I don't know yet. But yeah. Have a good night, everyone.
In the hollow of the night, shadows weave and twist. The wolf has told his stories, wrapped in mystic mist. Lurking in the silence where the echoes softly play, the echoes of forgotten tales dimming as they sway. The hours drip like candle wax, slowly melting gold. Lands of frost and twilight, secrets yet untold. The forest breathes a shiver, its ancient heartbeats thrum. Underneath the silver glow, the wild whispers come. Time to close the book, let the pages fall. You've roamed the winding paths, now heed the twilight.